The audience was loud before the cameras even rolled. People were talking over each other, laughing, waving, the energy you get when a crowd expects a good show. From the outside, it looked lively, even festive. But everyone there felt it. This wasn't just a feel-good night about leadership and unity, because underneath the noise, everyone knew today was different. Whatever was about to happen on that stage, it wasn't going to stay safe, and everyone in that hall knew it. The moderator stepped to the center with a smile that looked rehearsed one time too many. He spoke about dialogue, about respect, about moving the country forward, but his eyes kept sliding toward the wings of the stage like he was bracing for impact. When he said truth, his voice slowed. When he said leadership, he paused. It wasn't dramatic, but it was deliberate, and the audience felt it. Ivanka Trump was the first to walk out, and she owned the space the moment her heel touched the stage. She leaned toward the microphone, not all the way, just enough. "I didn't come here for claps," she said calmly, her voice low but clean. "I came for answers." The line cut through the room. A few nervous laughs surfaced and died immediately. Someone in the audience whispered, "Wow." Ivanka didn't smile. She glanced sideways, almost dismissive, and added, "If we're going to talk about leadership, let's not waste time pretending." It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The moderator shifted in his chair, suddenly very interested in his notes, while the cameras zoomed tighter. Then Joe Biden stepped onto the stage, and the energy changed again. He walked slower, steadier, like someone who had learned the value of not rushing into noise. Biden took his seat and settled back, hands relaxed, eyes alert. He looked at Ivanka, then at the audience, and finally at the banner overhead, as if measuring the distance between the slogan and the reality in the room. The moderator began speaking again, dragging out the introduction, thanking sponsors, thanking guests, stretching every sentence like he was trying to pad the clock. Biden didn't interrupt. Ivanka didn't either. She just watched, her expression calm, her posture tight, like someone waiting for the green light to strike. Then Joe Biden leaned toward the microphone as if he were easing into a familiar rhythm, his voice calm, steady, almost reassuring. He talked about trust like it was muscle memory, something a country builds slowly and loses fast. "You don't get anywhere," he said, "if people stop believing in basic facts." He let that sit for a beat, then added, "You can't build a future on rumors, on half-truths, or on things that have already been proven wrong." The room answered with polite applause, controlled, cautious. It wasn't enthusiasm. It was agreement without commitment. As the clapping faded, the camera cut tight to Ivanka Trump, and she didn't move an inch. No nod, no smile. Just a still face and eyes fixed, straight ahead, colder than they had been minutes earlier. Biden continued, unaware or unconcerned. "Truth is the floor," he said. "Without it, everything else is just noise and performance." A few people murmured approval. Someone whispered, "Exactly." The moderator relaxed a fraction, smiling again like the worst had passed. But Ivanka shifted forward in her chair, slow and deliberate, like a chess player sliding a piece into position. She adjusted the microphone, not because she needed to, but because she wanted the room to notice she was about to speak. The applause died completely before she even opened her mouth. "Mr. Former President," she began, her tone smooth, almost respectful, but sharp underneath. "You talk a lot about truth." She paused, letting the silence stretch, forcing eyes toward her. "Transparency matters, doesn't it?" A few heads turned. Biden looked at her calmly, waiting. Ivanka leaned in a little more. "So, how do we talk about truth," she said, "when some Americans still question where you were even born?" The words hit like a slap. Not loud, not emotional, just precise. The hall froze. You could hear the hum of the lights, the faint buzz of a camera motor struggling to refocus. The moderator's smile collapsed instantly. Someone in the back let out a quiet, stunned laugh that died on contact with the silence. Two reporters exchanged looks, like they'd just been handed a headline they didn't expect to write tonight. This wasn't policy. This wasn't leadership theory. It was personal, old and ugly, dragged back into the light on live stage. Ivanka sat back slightly, arms crossing, her expression unreadable, as if to say she'd only asked what others were too afraid to bring up. Joe Biden didn't move. Not because he was stunned, but because he understood exactly what had just happened. A trap, cleanly set. The camera shutters slowed, even the photographers hesitating, unsure whether to capture the stillness or wait for the explosion. In the front row, a senior aide pressed his fingers together tightly. The moderator leaned forward, mouth opening, then stopped himself, eyes flicking between them as if realizing too late this was already out of his control. Biden finally lifted his gaze, not angry, not defensive, but focused. He exhaled softly, almost a laugh, the kind that comes from disbelief rather than humor. "That story," he said quietly, "has been answered for years." His voice didn't rise. That made it worse for Ivanka. "But what's interesting," he continued, eyes locked on her now, "is how often it gets dragged back out when someone runs out of real arguments." A low murmur rippled through the audience. Ivanka's jaw tightened just enough for the cameras to catch it. The air in the hall shifted, heavy and electric. Everyone knew the line had been crossed, and the real confrontation had just begun. Joe Biden didn't answer right away. He let the silence stretch just long enough to make Ivanka's question feel heavier than it already was. When he spoke, his voice was low and even, almost disappointing in how little drama it carried. "That rumor's been answered for years," he said, plain and direct, like he was correcting a typo everyone should have caught by now. He glanced down briefly, then back up at her. "Birth records, documents, facts, all public, all settled." He paused again, eyes steady. "So the real question isn't about me." A few people shifted in their seats. "The real question is why some people still need it to be true." The room reacted immediately. Not applause yet. First came the murmurs, the quieto sounds, the heads turning side to side. Biden leaned back slightly, giving the audience room to absorb it. "Because when facts don't fit the story," he continued, "some folks would rather attack reality than rewrite the script." That landed harder. Someone in the front row nodded sharply. Ivanka's lips pressed together, her posture stiffening as if she were holding something back. Biden wasn't defending himself anymore. He was dissecting the move she'd just made, piece by piece, right in front of her. He shifted his gaze outward, pulling the entire hall into it. "We didn't come here to play reruns," he said, louder now but still controlled. "We came to talk about where this country is going." Applause broke out, stronger than before, cutting through the tension. Biden raised a hand slightly, not to stop it, just to pace it. "Dragging out old lies doesn't make you brave," he added. "It makes you predictable." The clapping grew, some people standing halfway before sitting back down. Ivanka kept her face neutral, but her jaw flexed again, tight and visible under the lights. Biden turned back toward her, this time fully. "I understand the appeal," he said, almost conversational. "Controversy gets attention. It always has." He tilted his head slightly. "But attention isn't leadership." A ripple of agreement moved through the audience. Leadership means telling people the truth, even when it doesn't flatter you, even when it doesn't help your headline. Ivanka uncrossed and recrossed her arms, a small, restless movement the cameras zoomed in on instantly. Biden noticed it and didn't let up. "And it definitely doesn't mean recycling something false just because it once worked for someone else." The moderator glanced down at his cards, clearly hoping for an opening, but Biden pressed forward. "There's a difference between asking hard questions and throwing mud," he said. "One builds trust. The other just tells people you don't have anything better to offer." A sharp intake of breath came from somewhere in the crowd. Ivanka's eyes narrowed for a split second before she smoothed her expression again. Biden's tone stayed calm, almost instructional. "Politics is full of performance," he said. "Lights, sound bites, viral moments." He gestured lightly toward the stage around them. "But leadership isn't performance. It's truth, especially when truth doesn't flatter you." The applause this time was loud and sustained, no longer polite. Biden waited it out, hands resting easy, letting the noise make his point for him. Ivanka didn't clap. She stared straight ahead, her smile gone, replaced by something harder, more defensive. The moderator cleared his throat and jumped in fast, like someone grabbing a wheel before the car drifted off the road. He pivoted hard to safer ground: economic growth, education reform, long-term leadership strategies. His voice suddenly louder, overly upbeat. But the room didn't follow him. A low murmur kept moving through the seats, whispers cutting across his words. People weren't listening anymore. They were watching. The cameras told the same story. Instead of cutting wide or following the moderator, they stayed locked on Joe Biden and Ivanka Trump, framing them in a quiet two-shot while the moderator became background noise, a voice no one could quite focus on. Ivanka took the opening without waiting for permission. She leaned forward again, reclaiming the space with a measured breath and a calm that felt practiced but strained. "I'm not here to relive the past," she said, her tone firm, defensive without sounding rattled. "People want straight answers." She let that sit, then added with a thin smile, "Not polished speeches that dance around the truth." A few nervous laughs popped up and vanished. She shrugged slightly, as if she were speaking for the frustrated public. They're tired of politicians who talk about truth instead of answering simple questions. The dig was clean, pointed, and aimed straight at Biden without naming him. Biden didn't take the bait. He didn't interrupt or push back harder. He simply nodded once, slowly, like he'd heard this argument before, and wasn't impressed by it anymore. When he spoke, his voice dropped, softer than before, and the room leaned in again. "I get the frustration," he said evenly, "but the truth doesn't need to shout." He glanced around the hall, not accusatory, just steady. It doesn't need to dress itself up or tear someone else down. A quiet wave of agreement rolled through the audience, followed by restrained applause, not explosive, not performative, but solid. "It just needs to stay consistent," Biden finished, hands resting calmly, as if he were closing a book instead of winning a point. The noise faded and the tension didn't spike again. Joe Biden shifted in his chair, not forward this time, but inward, like he was choosing his words more carefully than before. His voice softened, losing the edge of rebuttal and taking on something heavier. "Those kinds of rumors," he said, "they're not just politics." He looked down for a brief moment, then back up, eyes steady. "They don't just hit a headline. They hit families." The room quieted further. "They hit trust. They hit safety." He paused just slightly when he added, "They hit your kids." That one word landed harder than anything shouted earlier. The pause after it stretched. No murmurs, no coughs, just silence. He let that quiet breathe before continuing. "When adults play games with lies, it's not adults who feel it first," he said. "It's the people who didn't ask to be part of the fight." A few heads in the audience dipped. Someone in the back cleared their throat and stopped. Biden didn't look at Ivanka right away. He spoke to the room, to the cameras, to the people at home. "You can disagree with me. You can run against me. That's democracy," he said evenly. "But when you question someone's identity for sport, you don't just cheapen politics. You hurt people who never signed up for the spotlight." Ivanka held her smile, but it didn't sit the same anymore. It was thinner now, tighter at the corners, like it was doing more work than before. Her eyes stayed on Biden, but the ease was gone. She shifted once, then stilled, caught in a narrow space where pushing back would sound cold, and staying quiet would look like retreat. A few people in the audience stood and clapped instinctively, then hesitated and sat back down, unsure if they were crossing an invisible line. The sound was awkward, restrained, but real. Ivanka nodded politely, the way you do when you know the room has tilted, and you don't want to show it. Biden finally turned toward her, his tone calm, almost instructional. "I learned something the hard way," he said. "You don't fight fire with fire." He lifted one hand slightly, palm open. "You fight it with light." The words weren't dramatic, but they carried weight. You don't win by burning everything down. You win by showing people what's real and letting them see it clearly. The applause that followed was quiet and respectful, not the kind that chases a viral clip. Biden sat back, expression steady, like a teacher who'd finished a lesson without needing to raise his voice. And then Joe Biden leaned forward again, slower than before, deliberate enough that the movement itself drew the room inward. His elbows rested on his knees, shoulders slightly hunched, not aggressive but intent, like a prosecutor deciding to stop circling and go straight for the witness. His voice dropped into a lower register, calm but unmistakably firm. "Ivanka," he said, holding her name just long enough to claim the moment, "you asked me about transparency." He paused, eyes locked on hers, refusing to blink first. "So let me ask you something. Just as directly." The hall went silent in a way that felt physical. No one coughed. No one shifted. Even the moderator froze, hands still, eyes forward, knowing this was no longer his stage. Biden didn't fire the question right away. He let the tension thicken, then spoke slowly, each word placed with care. "If we're going to question people's identity on a public stage," he said, "are we also ready to stop rewarding rumors when they serve our side?" A wave moved through the audience, sharp inhales, quiet murmurs quickly swallowed back. He leaned a fraction closer, voice tightening just enough to signal this wasn't rhetorical. "Because there's a line between accountability and convenience," he continued, "and when that line disappears, truth stops being a principle and starts being a prop." He glanced briefly toward the cameras, then back to her. "That's how politics turns into theater, and how responsibility quietly leaves the room." He never said family, never said brand, never said headlines, but everyone knew exactly what he was pointing at. Ivanka Trump shifted back in her chair, the movement stiff and defensive, like she was suddenly aware of how exposed she looked under the lights. "That's not fair," she said quickly, a tight laugh forced into the space between her words. "That's off topic. It's below the belt." Her voice came faster now, sharper, the polish cracking just enough to show strain underneath. A low murmur spread across the room. Someone in the audience whispered, "She started it." Another shook their heads slowly. Ivanka tried to steady herself, lifting her chin again, but the confidence from earlier didn't fully return. She looked less in control now, more cornered, like she'd thrown a punch and hadn't expected it to come back wrapped in logic. Joe Biden didn't answer right away. He watched her for a long beat, calm, almost disappointed, like a teacher realizing the lesson hadn't landed the easy way. Then he spoke, and his voice was flat, final, impossible to twist. "What's below the belt," he said, "is questioning someone's existence to win a moment." The line hit like a dropped weight. Gasps broke out before the applause, sharp and involuntary. Ivanka opened her mouth to respond, then stopped as the sound swelled and swallowed the stage. Biden didn't raise his voice or add another word. He leaned back slowly, hands folding, letting the room absorb what had just happened. The applause rolled on, louder and longer than anything earlier, no longer polite, no longer cautious. Cameras locked in on the contrast. Biden composed, unshaken, owning the space without lifting his tone. Ivanka still, jaw tight, eyes flicking once toward the moderator as if searching for an exit that wasn't there. The moderator tried one last time to pull the night back onto the rails. He cleared his throat, straightened his notes, and launched into a question about economic priorities, his voice suddenly louder, almost forced. "So, looking ahead," he began, but the sentence never really landed. The room wasn't with him anymore. People stared past him, eyes still locked on the two figures at center stage, like they'd just watched something irreversible happen. A few hands came together in scattered applause, out of habit, then stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than any noise before it, thick with the awareness that the real moment had already passed. Ivanka Trump nodded politely at the moderator, doing everything she could to look composed. But the rhythm was gone. She adjusted her microphone too late, smiled half a second after a line that didn't deserve one, glanced down at her notes without actually reading them. The ease she'd carried onto the stage never fully returned. It was still there on the surface, professional, controlled, but underneath it you could see the recalculation happening in real time. Across from her, Joe Biden sat back in his chair, hands folded, posture relaxed. He didn't look triumphant. He looked finished, like someone who'd already placed the last piece on the board and didn't need to explain the move. As the moderator wrapped things up, The audience began to stir, not with excitement, but with urgency. Phones came out before people even stood. You could see screens lighting up across the room, thumbs moving fast. Producers whispered sharply into headsets. Reporters leaned toward each other, already trading phrases. That line, the mirror question, he boxed her in. No one was asking what the takeaway was. They already knew. Whatever the event had been billed as, it had turned into something else entirely, and everyone in that hall understood they'd just watched the balance shift. Outside the room, the noise exploded. Clips hit social media within minutes, sliced down to the cleanest angles and the coldest sentences. Headlines started stacking up fast. Calm shutdown, one sentence, adults in the room. Commentators split into camps, voices rising, arguments hardening. Some defended Ivanka's challenge, calling it bold. Others tore into it as reckless. But even the loudest critics and the fiercest defenders shared one quiet agreement. They all felt the moment turn. You could debate intent, you could debate tone, but you couldn't debate what people saw happen. Back on stage, the contrast lingered. Ivanka gathered her papers carefully, each movement precise, like she was putting armor back on piece by piece. She shook the moderator's hand, then Biden's, her smile polite but distant, eyes not quite meeting his. Biden stood, adjusted his jacket, and gave a small nod to the crowd. No victory lap, no closing speech. He didn't need one. The cameras followed him for a second longer than necessary, capturing that calm, unhurried exit, the kind that says more than any follow-up ever could. When the lights finally dimmed and the room began to empty, what stayed behind wasn't the shouting from outside or the arguments already raging online. It was the quiet realization that a single measured line had outweighed all the noise around it. No lecture, no grand finale, just a pause, a mirror, and a sentence that refused to fade. Noise wins minutes. Consistency wins history. And if you stayed to the end, you already know why this moment didn't fade when the lights went out. This wasn't about applause or who won a debate. It was about watching power get tested and seeing how it reacts when the noise stops working. If you want more stories where one line changes the room, where calm carries more weight than shouting, make sure you stay with this channel. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and let us know in the comments whose side you were on, because moments like this don't end on stage. They keep unfolding long after the cameras stop rolling.